Um, Thank you for joining. I will go through just some housekeeping. I'm just going to ask everyone just to please keep your cameras off, and if you can also just keep yourselves on mute. Feel free to ping any questions into the chat, and I will look to those toward the end, where we have left some time for Q&A, and the questions with the most likes I'll prioritize, so I make sure they get answered first, just in case we run out. But if we do, I'm sure we can kind of facilitate some responses for those questions that we didn't get to through the website. This is a recorded session so that it can be made available to anyone who was unable to attend the live panel event, and we will post it on our ParaPride Intersectionality Awareness Week website. And any other issues, hopefully we don't have any, we'll manage them as we go along. Just for brief introductions. So I am your host, Drew McDowell. I am one of the newly appointed trustees of ParaPride, who has been leading the inaugural Intersectionality Awareness Week this week. This is one of the events of a multi-day week set of events that have been organized on various topics. So please do go to the website to see some pre-recorded sessions, which will be super insightful. For those who are not aware of ParaPride, ParaPride is a charity, an empowerment charity that advocates for the visibility, education, and awareness of the LGBTQ plus community and disabled people within our community. We are a grassroots organization entirely run by a group of volunteers, and our lived experiences are at the core of our values. So I'm very much an ally as well as a trustee, and the topic of conversation as it relates to Intersectionality Awareness Week is looking at the intersection of the LGBTQ plus community and us as Black, Brown, Asian, Indigenous people. Before we launch into those, into the meaty conversation, I'd just like to go around and have our panelists introduce themselves. I will start with the lovely Saba.
Hi, everybody. Saba, I've got, is that me? Or
Yep, I can hear you.
I've got my pronouns as she, her. I am a queer South Asian woman, and intersectionality is something that's quite it's an important subject to me. I talk about it a lot because it's a word that's become weaponized and quite often used by people that have no understanding of its true meaning. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Saba. I'll move on to Rick Dove.
Hi, yeah, I'm Rick. Everyone hear me okay? Yeah, Rick, he, him. I'm a poet, activist, and I suppose trainer, workshop facilitator. Been working in sort of literature and live literature for about 10 years, and just general events for about 25. And yeah, I think I first came across ParaPride with one of my professional hats on, and since then I've been lucky enough to both perform for them and also represent on panels like this. So.
Thanks, Rick. Nice to have you. And lastly, Max Mann. Thank you for joining.
Afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
I can. We
Good.
can.
So my name is Laxman, pronouns he, him. I've been in this space or the wider EDI space for, I would say, 25 years, going through various iterations of corporate life, charitable life, and then public sector life, as well as a parallel volunteering career, which very much taken on activism in the last, let's say, 10 years or so. And so I'm very much in this space around the intersectionality and the effects that it has on people, whatever your intersectional maybe your intersectional lens, your intersectional identity. So interested and keen to get on with this talk. So back to you.
Bro. So we're gonna this is quite a meaty topic, and obviously I think, you know, we could probably spend hours discussing it and dissecting it and looking at the various aspects of it. But I think really today I'm kind of treating it as an introduction, raising that awareness across our community, and I think just starting the conversation really as to how the different challenges and different marginalized identities that we hold very much play into, you know, our own personal journeys, either in from a personal space, family, professional, or any other space that we operate within, and how we go through that journey as we age and have different experiences to learn to accept those identities and kind of live in those identities and live as authentically as we can. So as part, I guess, kind of on that, navigating identity and belonging, Lax, maybe I'll start with you in respect to, you know, how do Black, brown, mixed race, and lighter skinned LGBTQ plus individuals experience acceptance or exclusion within both their ethnic and queer communities? Like from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that in itself been a massive question to start with.
I know.
And because, you know, when you look at it, you know, black, brown, mixed race and light skin. So I can speak from a personal lived experience. But what, you know, obviously I can't speak for other people's experience. It could be anecdotal, and it can be what I know through my own cultural intelligence and my own learned experiences of other people's lived experiences. So it's always understanding that, you know, very often we always get asked about, like, as global majority people, how we all experience things and see the world and do that. So that's just from the get-go, is that, you know, it's a big question. But I sort of break it down into sort of, if you like, 4 things, and then how you intersect them. There's the bit about your race and ethnicity, and then there's a bit about your queerness, and then there's a bit about inclusion, and there's another about exclusion. And it's how you pinpoint those 4 things, like they sort of intersect in different ways. So if I take, for example, acceptance, now within your, let's say, your race ethnicity background, acceptance, this notion that global majority peoples are inherently homophobic, biphobic, transphobic, queerphobic, it is a lie. And I'm speaking from my lived experiences that that's not everybody's narrative. And so it's very easy as a narrative to be placed upon global majority people. It's very easy to say that they think like that, they do like that, they don't accept their family. And a lot of it comes from, you know, for those people that from countries of empire, or different empires, I would even add as well, because obviously when you're looking at Latin America, you're looking at different empires necessarily than the British Empire, which is the lens we tend to take when we look through the UK lens. So there is that homophobia and transphobia that was exported out of the UK to the world map, which was then became, you know, embedded within the culture and the legal and penal codes of those countries. So that can then frame how queerness is viewed by either people in the motherlands and those diaspora communities that come from those motherlands. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're always going to be excluded, because my own personal journey is not that. But at the same time, it's a spectrum, and there will be many people that will have their queerness excluded, and that, you know, from very dangerous and dark things that will happen to people, from physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, violence, and worse. So it is always a spectrum. It's always, you know, it's not pinpointed into one place. It's a spectrum of experiences, and some people will have positive, some people will have negative, some people will have mixed, and that may well change throughout that spectrum. So it's important to understand that side of it. So that's the sort of inclusion exclusion piece around, I would say, like queerness and, if you like, your families or your communities. Then you have the queer community side of it. So if we are sort of, let's say, queer people of color, again, there's inclusion and exclusion within those communities. So if you look at the wider mainstream communities, I would argue that there is an element of exclusion, because it's a very much a white lens in this country. Now, you know, if I was in a global majority country where my skin tone, my race and ethnicity was part of the majority, I would have a different lens, but I don't. I'm here. I'm British born and raised in the country of, you know, England, Britain, on the continent of Europe. So the dominant queer culture is white queerness. The dominant lens is white queerness. So there's an element of exclusion, which is what we've seen up until this point. But then at the same time, you will find inclusion as well. And so it's very nuanced to say where you find your inclusion and where you find your exclusion. So I guess what I'm saying is there's not one fixed point where we are included in our communities and excluded. There's no one fixed point where we are included or excluded within queerness. But all too often we do find that in the queer community, your proximity to whiteness denotes how much you are seen, heard, platformed, and allowed to speak, which is why we've seen the emergence over time and still to this day of our own community forums, our own community platforms, our own organizations that are by us and for us and speak for us. So I just guess it's very nuanced, and within that, it's going to be very different if you're black to where you're brown to where you're mixed race to where you're lighter skinned. So if proximity to whiteness is seen as a positive, then possibly if you are on the light skin of the spectrum, you may just get some privilege. There's definitely brown privilege that I have, which means I get treated differently to people who identify as black. So the point, you know, there's so many different factors within it, but I would just say that, you know, exclusion and inclusion can also be done through your own lens. Where do you feel included and where do you feel excluded? That you can also self-identify those points as well, rather than being told, well, you're excluded from here. Well, you can make a personal choice to exclude yourself. Therefore, I don't have to wait to be excluded. I choose to exclude myself because that's toxic. That's not good for my psychological safety, mental, physical health. So for me, I choose to be exclusive or excluded. So let's not miss out the agency and the power of oneself to determine where we are included or excluded. There's a lot in that answer.
No, I mean, they're all really, really good points and very much resonate with all of that. Because as you say, the experiences in terms of of that intersectionality of queerness, and also if you're black, brown, Asian, indigenous, like they're varying levels as to what that means and how that could pertain to within either an ethnic standpoint or, as I say, from, you know, being part of the queer community and the different experiences we have, you know, at a micro level. I know for my own personal experiences, I grew up with, you know, my Colombian mother, very still close to my black dad, but I wasn't as close to my black roots. So I very much grew up living and learning and understanding Colombian heritage whilst also living in a predominantly white household. So even from a privilege standpoint, I would say that I grew up with certain levels of privilege in certain neighborhoods, schools, things of that nature, compared to possibly some of my other, Black or Colombian side of my heritage. And even within the career space, we'll kind of touch probably more on this in questions after, but experiencing kind of the exclusion, at least within the gay part of our LGBTQ family, you know, have their own preferences and other exclusions. But also, you know, there's I think power in very much accepting our different identities and kind of the different perspectives we have. I don't know, Rick, Saba, if you had any more from your own personal experiences to add or reflect on that.
I think I just wanted to add, all those points, totally agree with Lax, especially the one about the exclusion through your own lens, and sometimes self-excluding for mental health reasons, or self-excluding because you're finding it and then particular environment particularly toxic or unfriendly or unwelcoming. In that I was the only black undergraduate at my college when I started university, and came out at university, and therefore every space that I was in, I was the only black person in the space. And in some spaces I was the only queer person in the space and the only black person in the space. And football and rugby teams were a challenge, shall we say. But I made a choice that even though I may not have been welcome on one level, I was definitely going to stick it out. Because it was part of who I was, part of my identity, and I wasn't going to not be in the space. I wasn't going to exclude myself from the space. I was going to make them kick me out, if that makes any sense. I think that's an important thing to take with you through your life, is the fact that you always have a choice. You can, sometimes things are difficult, but you can stick them out and give as good as you get.
Yeah, I can just very quickly add, I think I agree with what Lax was saying about, toxic environments and having to remove yourself. And I'll just give one very quick example. I mean, I'm a critical friend to the criminal justice system. I do a lot of advisory work with the Met Police. I sat on their LGBT plus independent advisory group for about 2 years. And in the end, I had to remove myself. I was the only woman, the only person of colour, amongst a table that was fully represented by white gay men. And it was a really toxic environment. I faced sexism, I faced racism. And in the end, even though the chair and the vice chair acknowledged that I faced that, nothing was done about it. So I decided to leave and walk away. And a year on, almost nothing has still been done about it. And I think it's a real shame. But it's a good example that, sometimes you have to let go and walk away. And it's about your well-being and your mental health. And you can't always kind of, fix a problem that's unfixable. Thanks.
No, I mean, that's a great point. And it's a shame, as you say, because especially if that group was made up predominantly of white gay men, you're losing a lot of the other voices that should be heard and should be reflected. But it's great that you've made that decision to kind of maintain your mental health and create that boundary. But Rick, kind of delving a little bit into, I think, what you were speaking about in terms of your university days, and it's, kind of lead into how you've navigated possibly some of those spaces. Did you have to also, I guess, challenge any invalidation of your identity, whether due to your race, sexuality?
It's difficult to put into difficult to express in a way that is going to work in 2020's Britain. This was back in the last century. So it's very difficult to explain for anyone that wasn't there what lad culture was like in this country in the 90s. And it would have been very easy, I'm straight passing, it would have been very easy to just swallow what was being said and to not be out. But it became, when I arrived at the university, it became very clear that I was going to stand out anyway. And I didn't really have much choice in that regard. So I didn't see any sense in hiding any part of myself while I was there, because it was nonsensical. I could do something on the Friday night, and by the Saturday morning, half the university was talking about it. So that there was no hiding for any part of my identity. So I didn't feel the need. I think when I came to London after university and was a bit more anonymous, you get to make more choices, and you get to work in spaces that work for you and stay out of spaces that don't, and all of that sort of thing. But sometimes you're thrown into a situation where you don't really have very many other options. So loud and proud was the way I went.
Good for you. I mean, not everyone has that confidence, and I think that's amazing that, you, especially, and even though I'm American, I know comfort. Acceptance?
Wasn't confidence. It wasn't confidence. It was it. No. I think my dad said to me when I was growing up, the difference between no, no, to be genuinely brave is to be terrified and do it anyway. And I spent most of the 3 years terrified. I had serious issues with anxiety, self-medicated with alcohol, but you do the things anyway because they had to be done.
Yeah, that's a different picture for sure. You know, to a certain extent, I think the lads culture still exists, and there's definitely, you know, I work in the finance industry, and it's very much, you know, still seen in certain, I think, parts of the businesses where you have your traders or financial advisors made up of, you know, predominantly white men from certain schooling, and it becomes a little bit of that boiler room type of conversations. Granted, it's less now because I think it's seen as not PC to have those conversations or act in a certain way. But Sab, I'm going to kind of come to you, and I realize now that as we're speaking about this, you know, there's the question is around and rooted around kind of the exclusion within the LGBT community, and the especially when it comes to dating around preferences. And I think a lot of people have been aware of the trope around people putting within their profiles no blacks, no Asians, no femmes, no trans. And I'm now realizing that you know, from my own experiences, predominantly was in the gay culture, gay community, but I'm not too sure how some of our wider LGBTQ plus people may have come across. But you might have a view either way, and be interested to kind of understand from your own work and experiences.
Sure. I'm going to be a bit cheeky and just start off by saying that as the topic of the event today is intersectionality, and I kind of was finding it quite amusing that I was asked the third question, being a woman, and the whole, you know, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw coined the phrase intersectionality as a Black feminist, as a woman, because in the pecking order, Black women come last. So that's just me being cheeky, and I just found it quite funny. Although we're all equals here, because I obviously do know Rick, and I don't know Rick, but I do know Lax and yourself, Drew. So I know that's not the case at all, but it just kind of, I found it ironic. With regards to with regards to the comment, no blacks, no Asians, no femmes, no trans, it's an interesting one. I'm too old for dating. I'm kind of past that stage, so it's not something I've personally dealt with, but I have had a few people. And actually, when I first read or saw the question, I actually thought about a sign that someone held at one of the recent protests, where it wasn't a dating site, but it was a sign that said, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, no trans. So I think that's a trend that's kind of being used publicly, not just on dating websites. And I think, you know, written anywhere, whether it's in a dating profile or not, you know, that sentiment still lingers in silence about exclusion. And I think it's a really sad testament that we're in 2025 and we're still talking about it. And, you know, no blacks, no Asians, no femmes. It's actually, you know, we are going backwards, which I find really depressing. So I think we need to be really clear that it's, you know, the preference isn't neutral. It's definitely shaped by power, history, and I think the media has a lot to blame for that narrative because of the way they're misrepresenting, I'm going to say it, colonial ideas and desirability, you know, aesthetically, what's pleasing, what, you know, how you should look, how you should be, you know, what a woman looks like. You know, immigrants are bad, white people are good. So when people of color, Black people, brown people are either ignored, or what I hear quite a lot, especially from a few Black gay men, that they get fetishized. It's not personal, it's systemic, and that's really worrying. As a queer person of color, those spaces don't feel like rooms that are necessarily safe to be in. And I think a lot of people are stepping away from dating apps, from what I've heard. They're not as openly used, they're not safe, because some of them are being used as entrapment as well. So that desire suddenly becomes a battlefield, and it's conditional, it's not kind of open and free. So I think it's policing attraction, which seems to be a really sad thing. Like I said, in this day and age, to be in a community where we feel less human just because of the color of our skin, just because of our melanin, or the way we are.
Yeah, it's interesting how you have quite referenced the notion of how society has normalized what is desirable. And I also think my personal view is that we love to operate in boxes because we can then feel like that's the most relatable way of connecting. I don't know. Or at least able to logically view the world in whatever box your society has created or made. I don't know, Lax, Rick, kind of on the topic of exclusionary language, and maybe just what I've kind of said in Saba, whether you had any other views.
I would just say, again, it's about self-identification and respecting. There's an element of boxes, whether you like them or not, but contextualize them. If they work for some people, that's fine, that's them. If it doesn't work for you, that's fine. But it's just an element of how we work. Now, some people say, I have no boxes, you can't categorize me. I'm, whatever it might be, I'm genderless, my art is genreless, I am, and that's fine, and that's good for them. But even just, for example, saying, I am Laxman, my pronouns are he, him. I've already sort of boxed myself to say I'm he, him. That's fine. That allows me to self-identify and allows people to understand how I identify. So there's an element of going into the box because I'm comfortable with being in the box, and it makes other people comfortable knowing which boxes I'm ticking. But equally, I could have said I'm Laxman and my pronouns are they, them. And that's fine. That's me and that's them. And if somebody else chooses not to put their pronouns or has whatever pronouns they have. So it's understanding that we all have an element of boxes. We all choose to pick them in language of how we identify, whether I say I'm a gay man or a queer man. I can have two boxes. For a long time, I just use the term queer. And now I'm sort of like a lot of guys my age are sort of reverting back to using the word gay because there's an empowerment in the word gay that doesn't always translate across in the word queer. And that we want to say gay and gay man in that respect. So, but that language is always evolving. Language is always shifting. And I think as long as you can understand nuance and context and just be like, yeah, we're having the same conversation here. You just choose to use certain terms that I may use, but as long as we understand the context of them, we can move forward, we can have dialogue.
Yeah. I think it's when it just becomes dangerous when I think those boxes are then masked to hide certain biases or prejudices. And again, the language of using it as preferences, just as an example. Rick, you look like you have something on your mind.
I say that all of these, and Saba touched on it earlier, with the sort of the wider colonial context, and it's really difficult to have this conversation, or I think difficult and probably a little fruitless to have this conversation. Sorry, I've been reading a lot of bell hooks recently. To have this conversation without putting it through the lens of capitalism and what capitalism is. And the idea that you have dating apps which kind of make their money by keeping you on there, right? They're no dating app wants 100% success rate. You go on your first date, you find your life partner, because then otherwise they run out of clients. So the algorithm that boxes you up, that makes you fill in your demographic details. The algorithm on the dating sites is designed to keep people away from their perfect partner and all of this sort of thing. So I've never been on the dating apps because it's a manipulation, and I just don't see. But increasingly, or the point I was getting to, that it's increasingly with the way in which data is used and algorithms are used, that this kind of pernicious categorization under capitalism that's used as divide and rule is now in every single part of our society. And very often, some of those divisions run straight through the middle of an individual. So you can be the intersectionality creates the wonderful internal conflict for things like writing essays and writing poems and writing plays and all of that sort of thing. But for living a life without anxiety, for living a life without feeling oppressed or marginalized, it's almost impossible, because capitalism is reaching into every part of your life and making you anxious and desperate so that you consume. And that's the whole point. And I just feel like we can't dance around that. We have to keep going back to the idea that all of these divisions are artifices which have been kind of created so that we can all be slotted up and kept away from noticing what's actually happening to the money and where it's all going.
And connecting with people, I think, connecting on a real level, deeper, meaningful level. Kind of moving a little bit onto kind of our second theme around holding multiple marginalized identities and some of the challenges, or some of, I think, as I said at the beginning, the journey that individually we probably go on as to growing into those identities and holding space of those identities. Saba, I would just be interested in knowing kind of how you've explored your own identities and accepted, and the intersection of those marginalized identities.
Sure. I guess it's probably helpful if I start by sharing my own intersecting identities. So the different hats I wear. So as I said at the beginning, I'm brown. I'm queer, South Asian. I'm a woman. I'm over 50, neurodiverse. I live with hidden disabilities, and I was raised in a Muslim household. So I tick a lot of boxes for certain people. But looking back now at the past, it doesn't necessarily feel like I've been peeling back layers. And I don't think I realized that at times I was hiding myself in many of those layers and having to just deal with one layer at a time. And there's parts of me, like I didn't really come out as queer till much later on in life, because I'm also the survivor of childhood abuse and cultural abuse. So there are many layers that I've had to deal with, and there are some, like I said, I had to put on hold. And I think the queer side of it, I've always been part of the LGBT plus community, but always as an ally, until I realized that actually this is my community, and relationships I've had in the past do actually come under the umbrella. But because my focus was so much on dealing with trauma and abuse and my mental health, that I didn't have the capacity to deal with other sides of it. Like my hidden disabilities, there are parts of me that, sometimes I still forget and I completely ignore. So it can be really tough, dealing with that grief for years, masking silence, just trying to fit into society. But also joy at the same time, which might sound a bit strange. I'm no longer those little fragments and broken pieces. I am complex, and I'm brutally honest, and what you say is what you get with me. But I absolutely love who I am today. And actually those multiple identities, I guess, really helped me working with other people and the kind of advocacy and awareness work I do today. So I think navigating the world, there's contradictions, you could almost say pride and pain in some ways. But it does mean that you know, I can go into some rooms that will hold me very differently, but I can walk into every room. I know who I am. I can walk in with my head held high, unapologetically, and I can hold my own space. I don't have that fear anymore that I might have had before because of some of my identities, or I was told I wasn't good enough. So I think it's quite powerful in some ways having those multiple identities, as long as you can kind of manage them and hold them together. And it also means that it's really helped me. I never forget my roots. I never forget, you know, what I've been through, in terms of creating space for other people and working with other people and helping other people. So I kind of embrace the good with the bad. And, you know, I have no regrets. I'm really grateful for every layer that's been thrown at me. Bring it on. Keep bringing it. But actually, I don't want any more.
Was there, thanks for that. I mean, I love that. And I'm very much, I think that's why we're going to be continuing our friendship after this, both of us having brutal, honesty on our side. Um,
Honest.
was there, I guess, if you look back, can you pinpoint any time where you were like, actually, I'm happy in who I am, happy in all of those identities that I hold and how they've served me today? Was there kind of a light bulb moment at all?
Um, I think turning 50, I know that, I mean, it's a few years ago now. But I really think turning 50 was the first time when I was like, oh my God, you know, I've made it to 50. I I just feel really free. And I think all those inhibitions of like, I've got to do this, I've got to achieve that. It's like, I don't anymore. You know, I've achieved, I've done, if I know this sounds morbid, but if I dropped dead tomorrow, I really don't mind. I've done everything I want to do. I'm really happy. I love my home. I love my cats. You know, I live my life on my terms today. I fully accept who I am. You know, I love helping other people. I love supporting other people. I'm really happy to say no. It's one of my favorite words. And I wish other people would say no more. You know, I'm really good at laying down really firm boundaries. I love my own company. So I think I've got to that place now where it's like, you know what? You know, I'm doing good. Given what I've been through and where I'm at today, I'm laughing.
No, it's amazing. I mean, I think that's, something we can all very much pick and relate to, regardless if we see ourselves as part of one or many marginalized communities. I think there's that learning and just looking back and
Can I
being
add
happy.
one little thing? I just want to say also, it's not about money. And I think people think it's all about money. It's about finding a job or something that you enjoy, you get satisfaction out of, not being a kind of, you know, victim to the system. And also, you know, surround yourself with 2 or 3 good people. You don't need to have lots of friends and acquaintances. Just keep it simple.
Yeah, I think that took me a long time to figure out. A lot of people who know me and knew me from younger very much didn't understand why I needed to be friends with everyone. And I think there was a level of excitement in that of I'm friends with everyone and a validation that they were my friends without realizing actually there weren't deep kind of friendships or meaningful. I think probably a lot of people that I speak to post COVID, I think have relished actually in reducing those friendships and relationships to focus on and spend more time where you get fulfillment out of them, both mutually. Um, I'd be interested in Lax and Rick, after as terms kind of your own experiences as well, of understanding and your journey of your different intersecting identities and what that looked like for you. Rick.
I think I came out. I came out as the first time, because you come out so many times in your life. I came up for the first time at university at 19, and I think I could only have done that because I found a group of people that I felt safe doing it around. And that, bizarrely, that group of friends are still, I'm still very good friends with that group of friends. I was actually up on Hampstead Heath for a walk with one of them on Saturday, a quarter of a century later. But I think it is very much a case of the quality over quantity when it comes to people, and therefore the safe space that you're in doesn't need to necessarily be that big. And I think that's something which I can definitely echo Saba on. One thing I would say though, I'm not too far behind you in age, but I have a lot of unfinished business. So if I drop dead tomorrow, I will be haunting Elon Musk and Keir Starmer on a timeshare. There's still work to be done. But it's that, look, I think for me personally, as a Black person, as a bisexual man, as someone with autism and newly sort of recently diagnosed ADHD, I was born with a congenital heart disorder, and I also have a couple of other medical conditions which are dynamic and variable. I've always found that bits of me get left out of most conversations. There isn't time to do the whole law thing. You meet somebody at a music festival, you haven't got time to tell them how a doctor told you at 14 you probably weren't going to make it to 33. There are certain bits that get left out of most conversations. But I think what I always look for in an individual is someone who's prepared to reach towards me a bit of the way, a bit of compromise in them. So even if they present really aggressively and unfriendly at first instance, or they seem like they might have issues with various personalities and various identities, if they strike me as the sort of person who's prepared to make a bit of a reach and a bit of a compromise, they're worth putting some time into and putting some effort into. Because ultimately, any prejudices or any issues that most people have been put in them. They're not born with them. So, if you can learn something, you can unlearn it. And I think that's been my mission as a writer for the last 10 years. It's like, let's identify the issue, but that's not enough. Let's help people unlearn poor behaviors or poor ideology. Let's actually challenge them and help people grow, basically.
Yeah, I think there's also what I've kind of been learning even myself, and I think you touched upon it a little bit earlier in the conversation, was kind of where some of this is rooted in terms of what's become normalized, and where certain things have stemmed from years past that just got lost in translation and then just became a bit of a standard. I think there's just, and not to bring it too much into kind of what we see in America, but and kind of going back to George Floyd, but I think a lot of what I learned through that whole experience and is the history of police within the US and actually the origin of what their jobs were originally made to do in terms of policing Black slaves and staying within certain neighborhoods. So that just kind of in my head just clicked as to, oh, okay, that actually makes sense as to how certain behaviors have just morphed over time without being called out, or actually just being understood and learned, because they weren't learned. We didn't learn those topics or that part of the history within our history classes, at least not in my schools. But I digress a bit. Lax, I'm sure you have your own experiences and view.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it sort of brief. I guess it's a bit about dialing up, dialing down. As to, first, it's coming to terms, who you are, what makes you, and some of that is a discovery. It could be later on in life, and then where you sit within them. So, as from a young age, growing up in the Midlands, Black country, and experiencing racism firsthand at school, nursery, primary school, in the area that we lived, the National Front area, if you're not familiar, far right racist. Being born in the 70s, I turned 50 literally like 2 weeks ago. So I hear that. And somebody actually sent me a message, complete side note. Somebody actually sent me a message. Congratulations on turning 50. You've joined the club and you've won. And I just thought that was a brilliant message to get from a friend. So yeah, think of it like that. There's an empowerment to that age as being part of your intersectional lens and lived experience. But going back to the sort of growing up, the racism firmly embedded, and you experience it and you deal with it. Then being at school, and I was in secondary school when Clause 28 was enacted. So I can categorically remember the lesson that we had where the teacher said, we were doing sex education, and the teacher said, I'm going to tell you something, but I'm at risk of losing my job. But I'm not supposed to tell you about homosexual relationships. We were just here to tell you about heterosexuality and intercourse and procreation. But some of you in this room will identify as gay or lesbian or bisexual. I think it was at the time. And everybody's like, oh, and the homophobia in the class where everybody turns to the people in the classroom that were always perceived to be gay or lesbian. So I can categorically remember that lesson, and seeing homophobia, like, in a way, was like, oh my God, you're going to grow into one of them. And obviously seeing the homophobia through the AIDS crisis and the government advert. So I grew up in that environment. But if you sort of fast track and fast forward, entering the professional workspace, and I very much saw racism at play in the workplace. And then the McPherson report landed into the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, and very much the term then institutional racism, and thinking, oh, this really applies. So I did a lot of, that's where I started my EDI journey around race and ethnicity over 25 years ago. And very much was in that space, closeted myself. It took me many years to come out, and I came out in my mid to late 20s. And as Rick said, you come out several times. So there was even like processes of coming out to different people and at different levels. But I had then come out, and so I was very much in this race ethnicity space, fighting against racism and institutional racism, and identifying as political Black from back in the day. And then as I had come out to myself, and then started to embrace like queer volunteering, because then I suddenly was like, there's a bit of me that's now being dialed up, and I want to do more in this space and occupy that space. And so I did, and I did a lot of work around Black queerness and Black health, always being a brown person in that space, because I always felt the brown activism, I wasn't seeing it, and it wasn't on the level where I was at. But I was very much dialed up in my brown self, my political Black self, and my queerness. And then I guess, you sort of dialed up when I looked around, and then just thought, well, I can't see myself represented. I can't see the narratives that belong to me. I can't see how I live my life being portrayed. I can't see how my social network is portrayed. All I see is negativity, stereotypes, tropes of what it means to be brown and queer. And I knew it could be different, having been in the Black queer space and having done like documentaries and big tube ads and small media campaigns across magazines, big media campaigns across tube billboard posters, to thinking, well, it can be different. If you take the narrative and own it, you can change it. And I think for me is when I really started to dial up and then step into that brown queer space, that intersectional space, where I was very much, I can be brown and love my space. I can be queer and love my space. But there's a space that's for brown and queer, which you can take it as excluded from either, but you can take it from, I choose to be included here. I don't be in this space because you excluded me. I chose to be here and be inclusive in my own space. And you're welcome to join me as a brown person in my brown queer space. And you're welcome to join me as a queer person in my brown queer space. But I chose to be included here. Is reframing it from playing, oh, I'm only here because I got excluded from them and them. It's how you frame it and how you have that self-empowerment. And for some people, it will come through exclusion, and some people, it will be a power of inclusion, and some it's a bit of both, right? So it's always a spectrum. But I guess stepping into that space and then, really changing the game, and I was the founder of Gaysians. It was my brainchild. I took on the baton from a couple of friends who'd already started this work, and it sort of got to the point where they said it needs somebody to do more, and pretty much has to be London-based, and you're that person, you have the network, and you're very neutral and objective and a strategist by trade. So you've got ideas that nobody else has really got, and you've got a method to bring them forward. So why don't you just do it? And I was reluctant for probably a year or two, but then I just looked and I thought, well, actually, nothing is happening fast. Nothing is changing in the way I want it to change. I can dial up here and step into the space very much on the front foot, be proactive. And so that's what I did when I launched Occasions. And people were just like, what is this? Where did this come from? It was very much done in a guerrilla way with the logo, the name. Nobody knew I was behind it. I was a serving police officer at the time. It was all intentional. You're not necessarily going to know because it's a movement. So that was, I guess, me dialing up all of those spaces through, living different chapters in my life and then getting to a point where this is my superpower and I'm going to tell you about me and my communities in a way that you haven't been told about them for a long time, because they were obviously pioneers and so many people who did great things, and and then it sort of plateaued a bit and there was this gap which was filled with stereotypes, and and I was adamant, I'm not going to have anybody's faces blurred, I'm not having backs to cameras, I'm not having actors stepping in, I'm not having distorted voices, I'm not going to say that we live these morbid sad lives. No, we don't. We live joy. And you're going to know my name and you're going to know my face and you're going to know where I work and you're going to know my community and you're going to know what's out there. And we exist in the thousands. Within, back to the first question, we are the queer ones in the brown communities. We're not the cousins that nobody talks about. We don't live in the garage or the basement. We are main house people. And in the queer community was to say, you slept on brown folk. We have always been here and we are still here, but you slept on us. Now you're going to recognize us in a way you haven't done before. You only have to look at mainstream queer culture now and you see how many South Asian queers get the recognition and people are getting their flowers. But there's still a lot of people who didn't get their flowers, and that's part of the work I still want to do. So you can step into this space. So I guess to bring it all back down is you dial up, you dial down. But when you have the power to control your own equalizer, that's the bit where the magic happens because you're doing it. You will still code switch, dial up and dial down where you have to, primarily because of safety. Important to know you can dial down when you need to. Your safety is always paramount because we always have to be cognizant of that and other people in our communities. But that bit of, if once you know what you want to do and you're there, dial it up, bring it in.
I mean, there's so much there, and thank you, all three of you, especially within that last bit of conversation. I think there's a lot of, even for myself, taking away and understanding. And I think one of the positive reflections is around the superpower of intersectionality, and the different experiences and voices that it allows us to bring to the table, allows us to connect with other people, relate, and reframing our own space, I think, is another takeaway for myself in that I don't necessarily, or anyone in sitting and holding multiple identities, having to fit in any one particular box, but actually reframe the space so that it's your own, and actually you're probably sharing that space with many others who kind of share your background, your identities, and being able to dial those up in order to serve you. I am conscious we have a few more minutes left. I don't know if anyone has any particular questions they want to ask our panel. Feel free to put it in the chat or come off and unmute yourself. Don't see anyone necessarily. So this is from Daniel Crompton. Not a question, but thank you so much, Saba, Rick, Lax, and Drew, for sharing all of your lived experiences. I hope that by sharing all of your stories helps people who don't have to navigate, who don't have to navigate the challenges you've all faced, to be more inclusive, more empathetic when moving through the world, and be more aware of our own biases, unconscious or otherwise. Thanks, Daniel. It's really lovely. I don't know if anyone has any final thoughts that you'd like to share. I think it's been a fantastic conversation. So
I think Abby's going to say something.
I just wanted to say firstly, thank you so much. It's been so educational. Also, a quick question: if anyone would be open to kind of opining on this, what would be kind of the one takeaway or tip or hint that you could give someone who's really quite new to this topic but would really like to like intentionally be more aware and make more of an effort to be more inclusive?
Maybe for one of you three to take that away. Maybe Saba.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say you can hire me to come and speak to you. Never miss an opportunity.
No, not at all.
Oh gosh, I mean, I think keep turning up to events like this, you know, listen to the people that have the experience, that have the lived experience. I think going to community events is so beneficial because you're listening and hearing from people that have that lived experience. So I would definitely do that.
Thanks.
I would just echo that, you know, and I spoke earlier about lived and learned experiences. So, you know, whilst you're listening today to other people sharing lived experiences, what you take away is your learned experiences. And that then means that your cultural intelligence has now increased based on what you've learned from other people. And that can be shared. And so, you know, it's not just like, you know, it's a ripple effect and it continues. And then very quickly, I always talk about power, privilege, and influence. We all have power, we all have privilege, we all have influence. We just have to work out where we sit within them. And in certain spaces, we'll have more of them, and in certain spaces, we'll have less. They're three independent things, but it's acknowledging where do you have power, where do you have privilege, whatever privilege that might be. And we've covered a lot of them today, whether that's white privilege, that's male privilege, that's first English as the first language privilege, educated privilege, able-bodied privilege, neurotypical privilege, whatever it might be. Somebody somewhere will have some privilege, and what that will mean is somebody else faces barriers, challenges. The very definition of intersectionality there. So it's understanding where you have that power, privilege, and influence. What can you do to understand and bring through the people that don't? The people that have the barriers and the challenges, what can you do to facilitate space and room for them?
Yeah, I think there's a, you know, from my perspective, this is a complex topic like many, and I think there's a place to be empathetic and show that empathy, and also show that with, you know, context is everything. I think if you're interested in understanding and learning, you know, people probably are open to sharing their lived experiences in a way that they can only truly share their own lived experiences and not necessarily speak on behalf of a group, a community. But there will be some relation in that. So, Rick.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of take a leaf out of Saba's excellent book and give a bit of a plug to writers in general, not myself. To answer your question, Abby, I think reading is the thing. There's a very famous quote by James Baldwin. I'm going to try not to butcher it now. You think your pain and heartbreak are unprecedented in the world, and then you read. And I think he then goes on to say that it was the books that connected him, that made him realize that the thing that most tormented him was exactly the same thing that connected him with every other human on the planet. And I think there has been a move to publish more marginalized voices. Unfortunately, we're not going quite far enough, but there are books out there we talk about lived experiences. There are books out there. People have taken the time to draw the lived experiences out of their bodies and bleed them onto a page, and they exist. And I would say the libraries, bookshops, whatever, not Amazon, never Amazon. Get hold of a copy, get hold of the books. There's a memoir coming out shortly by a friend of mine called Dean Atter. It says that and it is definitely worth reading, because that's a queer Black person's journey through the world. So that's Dean Atter. I can't remember the name of the title of his book now. It's on my bookshelf. I could go and get it. But yes, it's very good. And you know, just reading the books is definitely the way forward, and also keeps all us writers employed.
Sorry, Atter, A-T-T-E-R.
Dean Atter, so D-E-A-N, and then Atter is A-T-T-A.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Abby.
Can I add one tiny thing? I couldn't be here and not say that you are all welcome to also attend UK Black Pride, which takes place on the 10th of August at Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. I probably got that wrong. That's probably the most intersectional event or pride event. It's the largest Black pride event that takes place across the world. And I promise you, you will meet every type of Black, brown, Indigenous person of color at that event. It's incredible. And they've got, well, I think we've got over 120 stalls as well. So the knowledge and experience you'll gain there is phenomenal. So I can't sit here and not give it a little plug.
I absolutely promise I have that in my diary already. I just need to
Oh,
tap
really?
someone to come with me. Yeah.
I'll be there.
Find a chaperone. I will look out for you.
Amazing. And Rick's going to be there as well. I see a little hand up. Yay.
Shame it's a Sunday though, isn't it? I think it's a Sunday.
It's a Sunday, yeah. But it'll be worth it. It's our 20th
Yeah.
birthday, so it's our 20th anniversary. So it's extra special this year.
Brilliant.
Well, I know we've gone over time, and I just want to, not at all. This was all great. Really, I learned a lot, even for myself, and speaking to you, and also kind of just meeting you individually leading up to this time. I've been very grateful and appreciative of your time. Lax, Rick, Saba, and Ali, our interpreter. Thank you all very much for being part of this important conversation, and please do share. We will have the recording hopefully up this week on the Intersectionality Awareness Week website that's put on by ParaPride, so then you can share this link to others and hopefully share the knowledge. Thank you all again. Have a great afternoon, and hopefully see you during Pride at some point.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you so much. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.